Good. We got time with the noise, I guess, a little bit here. Okay. Hi, welcome back to Celebrating Culture. We're coming to you today from Homus House and Gardens in Darrow, Louisiana, and in particular, the Great River Road Museum. This is a place where Sicilians came in the 1870s and started to harvest sugarcane. And throughout the area from New Orleans to Lafayette to Baton Rouge, tremendous amount of sugarcane farms, which were worked on by the Sicilians. And I'm with Michaela Musolino. Michaela is a great person to come down here. She's from Memphis now, originally from New Jersey, and knows the Sicilian history incredibly well about music. I have a book here called Medieval Sicily, which talks about 800 to 1700. But Michaela, let's talk about how the history of the island evolved into the music of the island.
Well, Sicily has probably the most well-documented musical history out of all the traditions in Italy and the Italian Peninsula, probably out of most of the countries in Europe. We can say that the first song was documented in Sicily at about 470 BC. It was one of the odes, or one of Pindar's odes. His first ode was written in Sicily in honor of Hiram of Syracuse. It was in honor of his victory. And these odes were poems, but they were musical, and they were meant to be sung and danced by choruses of men. So that's how far back we can trace our history. And the various traditions that the immigrants brought with them to New Orleans that we know of today, like the funeral marches and the brass bands, those kind of things, they all started a long, long, long time ago in Sicily, and we can pinpoint exactly where they first started to be recorded historically.
So tell me, we talk about historically, then also one of the things that I became interested in was the Sicilian crops. They were doing sugarcane, rice, many of the things we see, oranges, lemons, many of the things that were brought to America, and fish. You remember fishermen as well.
Yep.
Did they have songs when they did these work?
Yeah, they sure did. A lot of the musical traditions we have in Sicily, a lot of the folk songs that we have come from work. They were songs that were meant to make this backbreaking labor pass a little bit more quickly. And sometimes they were songs that actually helped out in the work. We have an interesting tradition in Sicily. We have some fishermen songs that come from the tradition of tuna fishing. They're called Chialoma, and they're different chants, and they're very musical. And they were used as part of this harvest of the tuna, actually. We have the song I talked to you a little bit about when you first called me for this, called the Salinai. These are the men that worked in the salt mines or the salt flats. And they used to have different songs that they would sing. They were actually counts. And they could count with each phrase that they added how much salt was being put into their basket. So they would not be cheated. They knew exactly how much salt they were carrying by the length of their song.
Now, also, funeral marches. In New Orleans, we have the second line. But does that have origins in Sicily?
Oh, yeah. The funeral in Sicily, it's a big tradition. The idea of music at a funeral, we have documentation about in the mid-1850s, documentation by Salomone Marino, who talks about the laments that were sung. It was a very big tradition, had these chants. But singers and bands were documented even further back, and they were documented by this gentleman called the Marquis of Villabianca. And he was a noted nobleman and historian who documented Sicilian tradition, and he died in about 1802. So when he talked about this history of music being played at a funeral, we know that it came much earlier.
Very famous, actually, The Godfather has a scene of the funeral and the Dredge March. And today we have those in Covington. Father Damien, he has brought that back, the Dredge March on Good Friday. We see that, but also it's obviously popular in New Orleans where after a wedding or something, and the second line actually means there's the family is the first line. And the second line is the other followers that part of the event, whether it be a wedding or a funeral.
Well, we can take this idea of these itinerant musicians, we can take it back even further, actually, in Sicily. If we go back to 1661, in Sicily, there was a confraternity of Immaculate Conception, and it was under the auspices of the Jesuits in Palermo. And what they did is they were training blind men to be musicians, with the idea that these musicians could spread they could spread sacred music. And why were they training blind men? Well, it was an agrarian society. And when these boys had these illnesses when they were little that made them blind, or they were born blind, they realized that these young men needed a means to support themselves. So if they trained to be musicians, they could not only support themselves, they could support families. So the Jesuits trained these musicians, and typically it was violin and the precursor to the cello, which eventually it was replaced with the guitars, with the violin and guitar. And it started out as two musicians together. They would sing, and they would sing this sacred music, and they would be called for religious rituals and things like funerals.
What years are you talking about?
This began in This confraternity was in 1661.
I heard the phrase Siciliana music.
Well, that goes back even further. There was a noted historian who documented the history of Messina, and I have to think for a minute of his name, but his name was Gaetano Leconte Calle. And in 1907, he found a document when he was looking through all these histories and to document the history of Messina. So the document he found dates to 1491. And what's so special about this document is it talks about another tradition that they have in Sicily of the barbers as musicians. And in that document in 1491, it talks about a barber from Messina whose name was Gregorio de Berto. And it says that Gregorio had a student and he was teaching his students compositions, vocal compositions, and musical instrumental accompaniment. So this document from 1491 is seminal because it does three things. It identifies the barber as a profession. It identifies barber as a profession that's associated with music. And it also, in that document, it says that some of the songs he was teaching his student were songs from the Sicilian tradition. So this is in 1491 already, they're identifying that Sicily has a body of music that's unique to Sicily.
And later we found that there's the barbershop quartets that happened. And then I found that in New Orleans, family third generation barber is one that wrote the first song with the word blues.
Oh.
So these barbers came over from Sicily, and they were functioning here and playing music as well.
Yeah, because the barbershop was a social center as well. So not only did they cut hair, but they would pick up a guitar, they would pick up a mandolin, and they would play music, and they were centers for this culture, because it was also a means for the people to congregate. It was a social center. And that's a very old tradition. But barbers also have another tradition. The barbers, were kind of like doctors. So there's that tradition that they also were involved in medicine. And that kind of overlaps in Sicily because of the tradition of the Tarantismo, with the music being the cure for this malaise. And it was, so there's this combination that the barbers made music, and the barbers might have also been involved a little bit making music with the Tarantismo too. And that also dates back to antiquity. That was first documented in Sicily about 1641 with Padre Athanasius Kuyper, and he was the first one to really study this tradition, Tarantismo. And he noted that it was the Sicilian dialect was very therapeutic to cure these people from their malaise.
We think of the blues here in America. So again, a Sicilian was the first one to write the blues. And I guess he's talking about the music as a way of feeling better. Yeah. So when you play the blues, you feel better. In Sicily, they were doing the same things because it's a very agricultural island.
Yeah.
Much like we have down here in the South.
That's what they brought with them. They brought their knowledge for farming. They brought that tradition of music with them, because what else could they bring?
And they brought their instruments also.
Yeah. The instruments in Sicily go back to antiquity. We have a lot of the double reed instruments. I know you have them in the marching bands here. But in Sicily, they have the zampogna, which is a bagpipe, that's double reed. And always accompanied with the bagpipe is what they call pifero, which is sometimes in medieval music called the shawm. And the shawm, that bagpipe, that pifero eventually grew into like the oboe. But this combination of the zampognaro and the man playing the pifero, this duo, they were itinerant. They were also from that tradition of going around and playing, especially at Christmas time and the novenas. And we have a woodcut, I think 1785, by a Frenchman, Louis-Jean Dupré. And it's a woodcut supposed to be seen in the Côte de Sicily. And it's a woodcut of the bagpiper and the people that are playing as they're marching through the field. They're at a shrine in the novena.
And actually, I was in Sicily recently, and you can see those bands still coming through the old towns playing just like this track in uniforms, very professional. and the crowds react very favorably to it.
Because they're part of the people. And like I said, that we know we know that we can date that back to like 1661, because what happened with those Urbi, the blind players, eventually it grew to be more than two people, especially when they had certain novenas, they called good role musicians. And eventually it spread not just from sacred music, but they started doing it with the canzoni, just songs for celebration, songs for fun. But these traditions, this itinerant music, the Jesuits just didn't pop into their head. This goes back even further in Sicily. We know that there was this big feast. You said Feast of Saturnalia, right, which is the darkest time of the year in winter. Today, we probably would equate it with the Christmas season, so about December 6th, Feast of St. Nicholas, to the Epiphany, January 6th. And that's the time of year when the bagpipers and the musicians come down, the shepherds will come down from the mountains in Sicily and southern Italy, and they would play. And we have a tradition called La Strina. And the Strina is where they make music. They stop at every house, and they stand in front of the house, and they make music, and they call them blessings for good health and abundance for the people that live inside. And then the people that dwell there welcome them into the house, wine them and dine them, and that's how they receive their blessings. And then they go to the next house. And if you don't treat them well, you don't treat the musicians good, if you don't feed your musicians, they kind of call down curses on you. But this is a tradition that would go from, again, start December 6th, Feast of St. Nicholas, and continue to Epiphany, all throughout the Christmas season. And they play the Strina. But the Strina comes from the Strenia, who was a goddess. She was a Roman goddess. Her feast day was around the 6th. They believe about 1823. John Burke wrote a history of Sicily. He thought that the Strina became Befana because they would give gifts on that day. And the Strina, they think the word Strina comes from Strenia, and that was part of the season of Saturnalia. And these kind of all-night parties with music and dance and singing were documented by Tineios when he wrote his history of Sicily. And this is probably about, he lived around I think he was born around 340 BC. So we can document our history pretty far back.
So tell me, moving, I guess, into contemporary time, which we started 340, this is contemporary. But at contemporary times, if you have Thomas Jefferson, because that was an interest to me, is that Thomas Jefferson fell in love with Italian music.
Well, Thomas Jefferson had a violin teacher who was Italian. And he had made sure his children studied with his violinist as well. And then Thomas Jefferson spent a few weeks in Italy. And when he was dealing with the Marines, I guess, or
Barbary Coast
Wars, when he had to, he thought it would be great to have the Marine band. And he asked the captain of the Marines, when you go back to Sicily, get me musicians. And when he landed in Messina, because that's where, landed in Catania, because that's where they were stationed to fight the Barbary Wars, they grabbed a bunch of, I think, about 15 musicians. It was a band from Catania, and the band leader, I believe his name was Carusi, and there was a young boy there with his father. The young boy was called Venerando Pulizzi, and he came over, and he worked his way up through the ranks, and eventually Venerando Pulizzi from Catania became the director of the Marine Band, and he served for like 22 years.
Amazing story.
Yeah. And we had 3 directors of the Marine Band in the 1800s that were from Italy.
It just shows how much so the influence of Italian music in America goes back to at least Thomas Jefferson.
Oh, yeah.
And then we had the migration here in the 1870s, where many of them brought over their cornets or their other instruments they had. So in the 1870s, you have this big migration of Italian music coming into Louisiana and throughout the South.
Yeah, and then from New Orleans, right? They spread all throughout the Midwest. And I know there was a migration too from New Orleans to California.
Yes, there was.
Around like San Jose,
San Jose, and even Los Angeles, both. Yeah. It's been beautiful. So if someone wants to know more, do you have some CDs out?
Yeah, I actually I don't know when this interview is coming out, but we're recording this in December. And the Hummus House is decorated beautifully for Christmas. I have a Christmas CD I just released. And some of the songs actually on that CD relate to what we talked about. There is a strina on the CD. I have one of the oldest Christmas carol in Italy is on that CD. It's all traditions from Sicily and southern Italy. And we kind of, because I moved to Memphis, now I'm a southerner, we mashed up these sounds, these traditions with American traditions. So it's kind of like a South meets South to celebrate Christmas.
Great. What is the website?
My website, it's my name, michelamusolino.com. And you can find out where I'm going to be playing next. You can there's some history on there. There's song text. You can purchase my CDs, download. You can write to me if you have any questions.
Michaela, I want to thank you for being on the
Thank
show.
you for having me.
And I've enjoyed getting to know you. I'm so glad we're so blessed in the South now that you're here.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here.
And I have to recommend heavily to, to see her to play. And also, as we have so many Sicilians down here, we're just really fortunate the energy coming down that Michaela's brought to perform at our events. So thank you. And we'll be right back with more Celebrating Culture. Leave it on. Leave it on.
Are you happy?
I'm happy. There's one thing something I did I wanted to fix.
Okay.
Would do me a favor, just would you look here and make sure your mom's are we still on? Red light's still there? And it's good? Okay. So Michaela, this, I was very much, I'm trying to say it's okay. Okay, so Thomas Jefferson brings these Sicilians over the Marine Band. And today, New Orleans actually is blessed. It has the Marine Reserve Band is in New Orleans.
Oh, that's awesome. I have to come here.
You have to come down.
You have to come.
We actually talked to the director of the band about this, and they play all throughout the Mardi Gras parades. They do symphonies. So there's 3 Marine bands in the country, and one of them is in New Orleans.
You are blessed to have that.
I mean, it was an amazing story to hear. Sal Serio, who's an Italian genealogist, told me the story. He was a Marine, and he's very proud of the fact that the Marines were brought in to spice up the Marine Band by Jefferson.
That's awesome.
I think if there's anything else we want to get into, we need to say back over. I think we kind of covered. Let's see. Is there anything you think you wanted to add?
I think we covered a lot.
We did cover a lot.
More than I hoped.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we're good. I'm hoping that my mic, because I normally actually mic the person.
It's a pretty good mic.
It is? Okay.
It's a pretty good mic. Well, you can, right? Is it? I don't know. Wait. Do you want to shut it off?
I'm thinking, is there anything else? I don't know what else to add to cover. Things that occurred to me was sometimes people were maybe, there was a large noise or maybe the echo would hear strong and they end up lost some audio. But
I don't even know if we had that. Isn't there something? Oh no, we have to take it home and do it. Because we have that thing that cleans up the sound or something. We have to do it manually. We have to do it manually. What do you edit in?